Where we are right now and our planning is we're ready to come back full force. When we did this a while ago, it was definitely difficult to tell whether or not we would have a normal school year. But a year out from when we last spoke is really good. We have our new educator orientation is happening while we speak in this building. We're getting ready for kids to come back on the 31st, and everything is good to go. Obviously, the pandemic's still with us, so we have to take safety precautions, but I think that the mood is light and people are thrilled to be back in person. We will be wearing masks, which of course has been fairly controversial in Massachusetts, but we're ready. We learned a lot. Where to begin, I guess, is the question. I think that there were times when the pandemic and the community outside of Lexington got maybe more intense. So lots of things heated up on social media, and then we would see ripple effects in the schools and in our community. And opening the lines of communication really helped. So when there was a lot of controversy about the pandemic, just making sure that we had more ready and personal access to our parents and our staff and students was helpful. So setting up things like chats where people could ask whatever question they wanted to without worrying was really important. And so continuing to open those lines of communication, pandemic or not, I think is a good lesson for all public schools. We're starting to think about extracurricular events in terms of safety. So one of the things that's been very helpful is to be part of the Middlesex League, which is a league that basically competes with one another in athletics, and superintendents get together and try to figure out what are we going to do about safety protocols collectively, because you can't have one sports team having a set of rules in one place and then it being different in another school community. So we had a meeting recently, and we're working on having unified practices, including masking at indoor events. And that's a little easier for us in Lexington, thankfully, because people are pretty rational and practical when it comes to the pandemic. But some communities have faced a lot of turmoil over that. So it's not so hard, not so easy, I should say. It's not so easy to, maybe have those conversations in some districts. And we really appreciate working with our other area school communities to come up with consistent practices. If kids are playing indoors, they can expect to have masks on. Spectators can expect to have masks on when they come, until such time as it looks like it's safe to, go maskless.
But we're playing all the sports, right? I just
Yes, that's the most important question that kids will want to know for sure. Yes, we're planning at this point in time anyway, and playing all of the sports with safety precautions in place. What we've tried to do is work very collaboratively, and we made it through this pandemic, I think, because we've been such a team. That means the Board of Health, the school committee, the unions, leadership, all working together to keep safety first in mind. The decision to be wearing masks in the fall was put out through a communication by me on August 2nd, but obviously with lots of input. So consulting with the Board of Health on, where they are with that determination, talking with school committee members. We still got pushback. We always get pushback on various things, but being on the same page with key stakeholders and decision makers is really critical. I think very early on in the pandemic, it was a consideration, a strong consideration about how masks affect young learners. And in fact, we were not quite so sure. You asked about lessons learned earlier. We weren't quite so sure our kids would be able to do it. And we have some kids who are they have many challenges and masking would just not be possible. We were wondering about our little ones at Lexington Children's Place, 3 and 4 year olds, little tiny people, could they wear masks? And in this pandemic, just like always, kids always amaze us and impress us, and it was not as big a stretch as we initially thought, and we don't think it will be as much a stretch because kids are used to it now. So the mask ban, just as an example, was lifted at the end of the school year. In the state, we continued to wear masks in our schools because that was the practice, and kids appreciate routine and knowing what's going to happen. And of course, it's also odd to say you don't have to wear a mask in this environment, but when you get back on the bus, you do. So just in terms of consistency, and because we were closing out the school year, we finished with masks, and it was absolutely no problem for the kids. The dividers that people use to separate spaces were always in question because air quality is really the key, and not necessarily those plastic dividers that may protect you from a sneeze but not necessarily from the virus. So those are not things that we put in place to begin with. We do have layered mitigation strategies in the system: masking, hand washing, air quality, checking 800 parts per million when we hit that in the rooms, figuring out what needs to be done from an HVAC perspective, and many other mitigation strategies. We started the year last year with the 6-foot social distancing, and we had both remote and hybrid learning and in-person learning full-time. What's different this year is that the distancing is not going to be as dramatic because we have people who are now vaccinated and universal mask wearing, so that's going to help us protect one another from the virus. Honestly, it's been so interesting to think about this pandemic in more positive ways, and it's kind of shaken us from the comfortable spot we've been in the past and made us consider and try new things that we may not otherwise have tried. I'd like to think we would, but this was certainly a catalyst for doing teaching and learning differently. And I think we've learned a lot through what we've gone through. Yes, it took an inordinate amount of time to focus on the pandemic, but we still get at teaching and learning. And when we do have those conversations, which is frequently now, for example, we're working on our pre-K through 12 curriculum for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that when kids leave us, they have the skills that they'll need to work with all kinds of people in the world and support one another. So those conversations are just so incredibly rewarding, and I think enhanced by the fact that we've gone through a pandemic and it's pushed us to think and to do things differently in the world. We're closely tracking vaccination status for both students and staff. And the staff members are required to be vaccinated. We're working on our 4th MOA, which is a memorandum of agreement with unions to sort of finalize some language relative to that, or clarify, I should say. And the expectation is for people to be either vaccinated or have an exemption due to medical or religious reasons. And then our students over the age of 12 have had the opportunity to be vaccinated. We have pretty high rates across the board. High school is, this is in terms of fully vaccinated. Some districts report partial. So in conversation with the Board of Health, they said, really the emphasis should be on the full vaccination because that's the end goal. So we started tracking our data in that way, and many of our grade levels are above or approaching 80%. Our middle schools, I think 7th grade was about 63% when I last looked, but some of those kids have not quite reached the age for vaccination in order to be vaccinated, and the kids will have opportunities. We have, I think it's September 10th is our next vaccination clinic in-house, and I'm really hoping that the community now with the Pfizer FDA approval will get out and get those numbers up. The sooner we get those numbers up, the faster we can consider losing some of the mitigation strategies, namely the masking, and having school get back to normal. The teachers union has been great, and I think because of what happens at the state level, sometimes teachers unions take a lot of hits, including ours, but they have been incredible partners and really focused on the right kinds of things for education and on students, and of course staff needs, and we just couldn't have made it without them in this process. And so I like to sing their praises when I can publicly, because I don't think that happens enough, and it really takes a village, as they say. I wish there were a different proverb to share, but it really does take a lot of people to make this work, and they're part of it. We were tired last year. It was exhausting for sure. And you know, it was kind of like when you expend all your energy on meeting basic needs, there's, you know, not a lot left afterwards sometimes. So people, I think, were definitely exhausted, depleted, you know, that kind of thing. But I think we're getting used to living in this new world with a pandemic, and we understand what we need to do to keep ourselves safe. Knowing more is helping ease people's fears and worries, and spirits are high. And you know, just to be able to be together in a space is something that we took for granted, and we don't anymore. So I think you see energy from, you know, from people just enjoying each other's company in person.